My son spit on my face during Thanksgiving dinner because I refused to buy his wife a third luxury car. He wiped his mouth and laughed, thinking I was just a useless, retired old man living off his charity. He forgot one small detail. The house he lives in, the chair he sits on, and the company where he plays CEO all have my name on the deed. He thought I was a burden. Tonight I showed him I was the foundation. I didn't wipe the spit off my cheek. I just stood up, walked out into the freezing Chicago night, and made one phone call that erased his entire existence. I sold his house. I took back every penny, and I never came back. Before I tell you how I destroyed my own son's life to teach him a lesson, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been betrayed by the people you sacrificed everything for. My name is William Harrington. I am 72 years old. To the world and to my ungrateful family, I am a washed-up construction worker surviving on a meager pension and Social Security. I drive a 15-year-old sedan that rattles when it goes over 40 miles per hour. I clip coupons for the grocery store. I wear the same 3 suits I have owned since the late 90s. But appearances are the most dangerous lies we tell. What my son Brandon does not know is that I am not just a retired worker. I am the silent owner of Harrington Holdings, the shell company that owns his house, his cars, and the construction supply firm where he acts as the big boss. I built this empire with calloused hands and sleepless nights, and I hid it all to teach him the value of hard work, a lesson he clearly never learned. The night it all ended started with a text message. It was Thanksgiving. The wind off Lake Michigan was cutting through the streets of Chicago like a razor blade. It was 10 degrees below zero. I was standing at the bus stop because my old car wouldn't start. My phone buzzed. It was Brandon. "Don't be late again, old man. Vanessa has friends coming over, and we don't want you embarrassing us." I looked at the text and felt that familiar ache in my chest. I had spent 2 hours freezing in the cold to get to the bank earlier that day to withdraw $500. It was my monthly contribution to their grocery bill. They called it rent. I called it the price of seeing my grandchildren. When I arrived at the house, a sprawling 6-bedroom Victorian mansion in the most expensive district of Chicago, the windows were glowing with warmth. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I bought this house 15 years ago under an LLC. I pay the property taxes. I pay the insurance. I even pay the landscaping crew that keeps the hedges perfect. Brandon thinks he owns it because I let him sign a lease agreement with a company he thinks is an anonymous landlord. He pays $0 a month. He calls it a perk of his executive job. I call it charity. I knocked on the door. Vanessa opened it. She is 35, beautiful in a sharp plastic way, and has eyes that scan you for value like a barcode reader. She was holding a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly food budget. "Oh, William," she sighed, blocking the doorway for a second too long. "You made it. We were betting on whether you would get lost." She stepped back, not offering to take my heavy wet coat. I walked in the warmth of the house, hitting my frozen face. The smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing filled the air. It smelled like the holidays I used to have with my late wife before everything became about money. Brandon was in the living room pouring drinks for a couple I didn't recognize. He looked the part of the successful executive. Tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, a Rolex on his wrist. A Rolex I paid for when I secretly covered his credit card debt 3 years ago. He saw me and his smile dropped by a fraction. "Dad," he said, his voice loud and performative. "Glad you could drag yourself out here. Try not to touch the hors d'oeuvres yet. We are waiting for the important guests." I went to the corner of the room and sat in a stiff armchair. My grandchildren, twins, aged 8, were glued to their tablets. They barely looked up. "Hi, Grandpa," one mumbled. I wanted to hug them to give them the chocolates I had in my pocket, but Vanessa intercepted me. "Don't give them that cheap candy." "William," she hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. It's full of sugar and dyes. We only do organic." She looked at my suit. "And honestly, couldn't you have bought something new? That jacket smells like mothballs and desperation. It's embarrassing." I touched the lapel of my jacket. It was a charcoal wool blend. It was the last suit my wife bought me before she passed away from cancer 5 years ago. She had picked it out. She said I looked handsome in it. To Vanessa, it was just old rags. To me, it was my armor. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and put the chocolates back in my pocket. I sat there for an hour invisible, watching my son play the big shot, boasting about deals he didn't close and profits he didn't earn. He didn't know that I review the company ledgers every Sunday night. I knew the company was bleeding cash because he was siphoning funds for personal trips and luxury dinners. I had been covering the losses from my private trust to keep the employees from losing their jobs. Dinner was served. The table was set with crystal and silver. I was placed at the far end near the kitchen door. The conversation flowed around me, ignoring me like a rock in a stream. They talked about vacations in the Maldives, about the new country club membership, about the volatility of the market. Brandon talked loudly about cryptocurrency. I knew where this was going. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. When the dessert was served, Brandon cleared his throat. The room went quiet. He looked at me, flashing a smile that looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "So, Dad," he started swirling his brandy. "Vanessa and I have been looking at some investment opportunities. Really exciting stuff. High-yield crypto markets. We are looking to buy in before the end of the quarter." I cut a piece of my pumpkin pie. "That sounds risky, son," I said softly. "It's not risky if you know what you're doing," he snapped, his patience instantly evaporating. "Look, we need some liquidity. The bonus from the company hasn't cleared yet." He glared at me, blaming the company structure, unaware he was glaring at the owner. "We need $80,000. Just a short-term loan. We know you have that retirement stash Mom left." The table went silent. The guests looked down at their plates. $80,000. I knew exactly why he needed it. I had seen the browser history on his company laptop. I had seen the invoices from the luxury car dealership. Vanessa wanted a G-Wagon to match her friends. It wasn't crypto, it was vanity. I put my fork down. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. "I don't have $80,000, Brandon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I live on a fixed income. You know this. Your mother's life insurance money is for emergencies, not for speculation." Vanessa let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Emergencies? William, look at you. You are 72. You are the emergency. What are you saving it for, your funeral? You are sitting on money while we are trying to build a legacy here." I looked at her. A legacy of debt and lies. I thought. But I said nothing. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. The crystal glasses jumped. "Don't lie to me, old man. I know you have it. You are just being a selfish miser. You have always been cheap. That is why Mom died in that second-rate hospital, because you were too cheap to pay for the best." That hit me. It hit me harder than a physical blow. My wife had received the best care in the world. I had flown specialists in from Switzerland. I had spent $2 million trying to save her. Brandon didn't know that, because I told him insurance covered it. I wanted to spare him the guilt of the cost, and now he used it as a weapon. I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "Do not speak about your mother," I said, my voice low. "You have a roof over your head. You have food. I have given you enough. I will not give you $80,000 for a car that you do not need." The room gasped. I had called out the lie. Vanessa turned red. She looked at Brandon, her eyes demanding action. Brandon stood up. He was drunk. He was angry. He was humiliated in front of his friends. He walked over to me. He towered over me. "You are a leech," he spat. "You come here, eat my food, drink my wine, and judge me. You are nothing. You are a burden on this family. I have carried you for 10 years. He was screaming now, spittle flying from his mouth. I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't back down. And then he did it. He gathered the saliva in his mouth and spit directly into my face. A glob of warm spit landed on my cheek and slid down to my chin. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. No one moved. No one breathed. My grandchildren were watching, their eyes wide with terror. Vanessa was smirking, a small vindictive smile playing on her lips. Brandon stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to shout, to cry, to beg. He expected the weak old man. He expected the father who would forgive anything. But that father died in that chair. I didn't wipe the spit off. I let it sit there on my skin, a wet, burning brand of disrespect. I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had secretly protected from bankruptcy 3 times. I saw a stranger. I picked up my napkin. I folded it neatly and placed it on the table. I did not look at the guests. I did not look at Vanessa. I turned my back on my son. "Get out!" Brandon screamed behind me. "Get out and don't come back until you have the check." I walked to the hallway. I put on my heavy wet coat. I buttoned it up slowly. My fingers were steady. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the Chicago winter. The wind hit me, freezing the spit on my cheek. It stung. It was the only thing I felt. I walked down the long, manicured driveway. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the warm glow of the windows. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop. The cold was biting through my shoes, but my mind was crystal clear. It was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an old model taped together at the corner. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang twice. Blackwood. A deep voice answered. It was 9:00 p.m. on Thanksgiving, but Arthur Blackwood answered. He was the most expensive, ruthless corporate lawyer in Chicago, and he was the only man who knew the full extent of my assets. William Blackwood asked, "Is everything all right?" "Arthur," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like grinding metal. "It is time." "Time for what? Clause 13, I said. There was a pause on the line. Blackwood knew what Clause 13 was. We had written it into the trust documents a decade ago as a nuclear option, a fail-safe. It was the clause that revoked all beneficiary privileges, froze all assets, and initiated the immediate liquidation of the Harrington Trust's liabilities. "Are you sure?" William Blackwood asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Clause 13 is scorched earth. It triggers immediate eviction. It freezes the company accounts. It cancels the credit lines. It strips him of everything. There is no going back." I touched my cheek. The spit was frozen there. "I am sure," I said. "Execute it. Tonight. I want the power cut off by midnight. I want the accounts frozen by morning, and send the eviction team at dawn." "Consider it done," Blackwood said. "Where will you go?" I looked up at the sky. It was dark and empty. "I am going to the penthouse," I said. The penthouse was a property I owned in the city center, a glass fortress in the sky that Brandon didn't know existed. It had been empty for years, waiting for a day I hoped would never come. I hung up the phone. I finally took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my face. I looked at the cloth stained with the betrayal of my own blood. I dropped it into the trash can next to the bus stop. The bus arrived. I stepped on. I sat in the back. As the city lights blurred past the window, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the heavy grinding gears of justice starting to turn. My son wanted to be a self-made man. Tomorrow morning he would get his chance. He would wake up in a house he didn't own, with a job he didn't have, and a bank account that didn't exist. The ride to the city center took 40 minutes. I got off and walked into the lobby of the Millennium Tower. The doorman, a man who had worked there for 20 years, looked up. He saw the old coat, the tired eyes. He started to stand up to tell me I was in the wrong place, then he paused. He recognized me. "Mr. Harrington," he said, surprised. "We haven't seen you in—" "It's been a long time, Henry," I said. "I need the key to the penthouse." He scrambled to the desk. "Of course, sir. Right away. Welcome home." I took the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened into a dark, silent apartment. It smelled of dust and stale air. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago lay spread out below me, a grid of golden lights. Somewhere out there in the suburbs, Brandon was probably laughing, drinking my brandy, thinking he had won. He was probably telling his friends how he had put the old man in his place. I walked to the desk in the study. I turned on the computer. I logged into the master control account for the Harrington Trust. The screen flickered to life. I saw the numbers. Millions of dollars in assets. Real estate, stocks, bonds. And then I saw the sub-accounts for Brandon. The monthly allowances. The auto pay for the mansion's electricity, gas, water. The lease payments for the cars. The credit card balances. I clicked on the Manage tab. My finger hovered over the mouse. I remembered the day Brandon was born. I remembered holding him in the hospital, promising to give him the world. I had failed. I gave him the world, but I forgot to teach him how to live in it. I had created a monster who spit on his father. I clicked Cancel All. The screen refreshed. Status inactive. I went to the utility accounts, electricity, gas, internet. I selected the property address. I clicked Disconnect Service, Immediate. I went to the company payroll system. I found Brandon Harrington, CEO. I clicked Terminate Employment. Reason: gross misconduct. I sat back in the leather chair. It was done. The first domino had been pushed. I poured myself a glass of water from the kitchen tap. It was cold. It tasted clean. I sat by the window and waited. I wasn't waiting for the sun to rise. I was waiting for the phone to ring. I knew exactly when it would happen. It would happen when the lights went out at the mansion. It would happen when the heat stopped running. It would happen when the reality of the world crashed into their bubble. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I was wide awake. I was ready for war. The sun rose over Chicago the next morning, but the heat inside the mansion did not. I knew the exact moment the power grid severed its connection to my son's house because I was watching the utility dashboard on my laptop screen from the 45th floor. At 6:00 a.m. precisely, the status light for the property at 142 Lakeshore Drive turned from green to red. Disconnected. I sat in my leather chair holding a cup of black coffee, imagining the scene. The mansion relied on a complex high-end HVAC system that required a constant flow of electricity to keep the drafty Victorian rooms habitable. Without it, the house was just a pile of freezing bricks. I pictured Brandon waking up shivering under his Egyptian cotton sheets, reaching for the thermostat, and finding the screen dead. He would not think about the fact that he hadn't paid an electric bill in 15 years. He would not think about the fact that the bill was $4,000 a month in the winter. He would only think that I, the old man he treated like an unpaid secretary, had forgotten to mail the check. My phone began to buzz on the mahogany desk. It was Brandon. I let it ring. I took a sip of coffee. I watched the screen. He called 3 times in a row. I didn't answer. I wanted him to sit in the cold a little longer. I wanted the frost to settle into his bones. According to the GPS tracker on his company-leased Range Rover, which I also monitored from my dashboard, he left the house at 7:15 a.m. He was heading to his favorite artisanal coffee shop, a place where a latte cost $8 and the baristas treated him like a celebrity. He needed his caffeine before he could come to my apartment to scream at me. I switched tabs on my computer to the corporate credit card portal. This was the card Brandon used for everything. Gas, coffee, dinners, dry cleaning. He called them business expenses. I called them theft. I watched the transaction log populate in real time. 7:22 a.m. Pump 4 Shell Station. Transaction attempt $85. Status declined. Code account closed. 7:23 a.m. Pump 4 Shell Station. Transaction attempt $8,500. Status declined. Code account closed. I could see him in my mind. He would be slamming the card into the reader, cursing the machine, blaming the technology. He would be looking around, hoping no one saw the man in the $2,000 suit getting rejected by a gas pump. He would try a different card. 7:25 a.m. Point of sale Shell Station. Transaction attempt $4.50. Coffee. Status declined. Code account closed. That was the one that would hurt. Not the gas. The gas was a necessity. The coffee was his ritual. The coffee was his status. Being told he couldn't afford a cup of coffee was a slap in the face that matched the one he gave me. My phone rang again. This time I picked it up. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Brandon screamed. "I didn't even say hello." His voice was high panic mixing with his usual arrogance. "The power is out at the house. The heating is off. The kids are freezing, William, and now my card isn't working. Did you forget to pay the bills again, you senile old fool? I told you to set up auto-pay." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the gray skyline. The silence in my penthouse was absolute. It was the silence of total control. "I didn't forget, Brandon," I said calmly. "Then fix it," he yelled. "Call the power company. Call the bank." I'm standing at a gas station looking like an idiot. "I have a meeting in an hour. Fix it right now, or so help me God, I will throw your stuff out on the street." "You can't throw my stuff out, son," I said, "because you don't own the house." There was a pause on the line, a heavy, confused silence. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I own the house. I have lived there for 10 years. You live there because I let you live there," I said. "And the bills, I didn't forget them. I canceled them. Canceled them." He laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "You can't cancel my bills. You just handle the paperwork. The money comes from the company trust." I closed my eyes. The ignorance was staggering. He truly believed the money appeared by magic. He believed the company trust was some faceless entity that existed solely to serve him. He never asked where the money came from. He never asked why the trust had the same initials as his father. William Harrington. W.H. Trust. "The money comes from me, Brandon," I said. "I have paid your electric bill for 15 years. I have paid your water, your gas, your internet. I have paid the lease on your car. I have paid the credit card you just tried to use. It cost me $12,000 a month to keep your life running. And as of last night, the bank is closed." "You are lying," he spat. "You are a broke construction worker. You are trying to scare me." "Well, it's not working. I am going to call the bank myself. I am the CEO of Harrington Supply. They will listen to me." "You are the CEO in title only," I said. "Check your email, Brandon." I hung up. I didn't want to hear him read the termination notice. I wanted to imagine it. I wanted to imagine him standing next to the gas pump, reading the email from the board of directors, which was just me and my lawyer, informing him that he had been relieved of his duties, effective immediately, due to gross misappropriation of funds. I turned my attention back to the computer. The next phase was already in motion. This was the part that would cut the deepest. Brandon was arrogant, but Vanessa was vain. Brandon cared about power, but Vanessa cared about appearances. She lived for the envy of the other mothers at the private school where we sent the twins. I opened the tracking software for the vehicle leasing company. I owned the leasing company, too. It was a small subsidiary I acquired years ago to manage the fleet of construction trucks, but I used it to provide cars for the family. Vanessa drove a pearl-white Porsche Cayenne. It was her pride and joy. She washed it twice a week. She parked it in the front row of the school drop-off line every morning. I checked the time. 7:45 a.m. School drop-off was in full swing. I called the repo team dispatch. I had arranged this the night before with the operations manager. "Is the unit in position?" I asked. "Yes, Mr. Harrington," the dispatcher replied. "We have visual on the target. She is in the drop-off line. We are blocked in behind her. She can't move." "Do it," I said. I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have seen it with my own eyes. But the report I received later was vivid enough. Vanessa was sitting in the Porsche waiting for the valet to open the door for the twins. She was probably checking her makeup in the mirror, preparing to give a condescending wave to the mothers driving minivans. Then the tow truck backed up. It didn't sneak up. It came in loud reverse lights, beeping, heavy chains rattling. It blocked the entire drop-off lane. The other parents started honking. The security guard blew his whistle. The repo man, a guy named Mike who had worked for me for 20 years and knew exactly who Vanessa was, hopped out. He didn't go to the window to talk. He went straight to the wheels. He began strapping the clamps onto the tires of the Porsche. Vanessa jumped out of the car. I could hear her shrill voice in my mind. "Excuse me, what do you think you are doing? This is a $100,000 car. Get your filthy hands off it." Mike would have handed her the clipboard. The clipboard with the repossession order signed by the owner of the vehicle. Harrington Leasing, LLC. Reason for repossession, contract termination. The twins were watching from the back seat. The other mothers were rolling down their windows, phones out recording. This was the social death Vanessa feared more than physical death. I watched the GPS dot on my screen. It didn't move for 10 minutes. The line of cars behind her would be backed up for blocks. The humiliation was public. It was total. Then the dot began to move, not at driving speed, at towing speed. Vanessa was left standing on the sidewalk in the freezing cold, her children beside her watching her status symbol being dragged away to the impound lot. She had no car. She had no way to get home. And when she tried to use her phone to call an Uber, she would find that her family plan data had been suspended. I closed the laptop. The room felt colder, but it was a clean cold. It was the cold of a job site before the work begins. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette. I opened the fridge. It was empty, save for a bottle of water. I realized I hadn't eaten since yesterday lunch. I needed to go out. I needed to buy food. But for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't checking the price of eggs to make sure I had enough left over for Brandon's emergencies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own wallet. It was an old leather thing cracked at the spine. Inside, tucked behind my driver's license, was a black debit card, the MasterCard for the main trust account. I had never used it. I had carried it like a secret weapon, a nuclear key I hoped never to turn. Today, I would use it. I put on my coat. I took the elevator down. The doorman smiled at me. "Going out, Mr. Harrington." "Yes, Henry," I said. "I am going to buy a steak, a very expensive steak." As I walked out onto the bustling street, my phone vibrated again. It was Vanessa, then Brandon, then Vanessa again. They were realizing that this wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a mistake. The walls were closing in. I walked to the nearest high-end grocery store. I bought a prime ribeye. I bought a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than the $80 Brandon had demanded from me. I bought fresh bread. I paid with the black card. The cashier didn't look at my old coat. She looked at the card, then up at me with new respect. I went back to the penthouse. I cooked the steak. I sat by the window eating alone, watching the city below. My phone lay on the table screen down, buzzing relentlessly against the wood. It sounded like an angry insect trapped in a jar. They were panicking. They were cold. They were immobile. They were broke. And they still had no idea that the man they were calling the man they wanted to scream at was the man holding the jar. But this was just the beginning. I knew my son. I knew his pride. He wouldn't beg yet. He would attack. He would come looking for me. He would go to my old apartment, the decoy apartment I kept in a rundown neighborhood, to maintain the charade of my poverty. He would go there to intimidate me, to force me to fix his life. He wouldn't find me, but he would find something else. I had left a little surprise for him there, a trap baited with his own greed. I finished my wine. I picked up the phone and turned it off completely. Let them scream into the void. Tonight, I would sleep in a bed that I owned in a building that I owned with a conscience that was finally perfectly clear. The storm was raging outside, but for the first time in a decade, I was warm. I watched my son kick down the door of my apartment on a high-definition monitor while I sipped a glass of sparkling water. It was almost noon on Friday. I was sitting in the climate-controlled silence of my penthouse study 45 floors above the city, while Brandon and Vanessa were breaking into the ground-floor rental unit I maintained in the crumbling South Side district. I had installed the cameras 3 years ago, concealing them inside the smoke detectors, and the eyes of a cheap porcelain owl on the mantelpiece anticipating exactly this moment. I knew that once the shock of the frozen bank accounts wore off, the rage would set in. And rage always seeks a target. They arrived in an Uber. I zoomed in on the feed. It was a basic sedan, not the Uber Black they usually insisted upon. Vanessa stepped out into the slush, her designer boots instantly ruined by the gray, salty muck covering the sidewalk. She looked furious. She was shivering in her fur coat, a coat I knew was leased, yelling at the driver who sped away as fast as he could. Brandon looked deranged. His hair was unkempt, likely because he couldn't style it, without his heated bathroom mirrors, and his face was a mask of red, blotchy anger. They didn't knock. They didn't call out. Brandon simply drove his shoulder into the flimsy particle board door. The lock, which cost me $12 at a hardware store, snapped with a pathetic crack. They stumbled into the hallway, bringing the freezing wind and their entitlement with them. I turned up the volume on my speakers. The audio was crisp. "Where is he?" Brandon screamed. He was turning in circles, his fists clenched. "Come out, old man. I know you are here, hiding like a rat." The apartment was designed to look like the home of a man who had given up. There was peeling wallpaper, a stained beige carpet, and furniture I had salvaged from roadside curbs. It smelled of damp wool and old soup. It was the stage set for the poverty I wanted them to see, the poverty they mocked, the poverty that made them feel superior. Now they were tearing it apart. Vanessa walked into the small kitchenette. She swept her arm across the counter, sending a stack of ceramic plates crashing to the floor. They shattered into sharp, jagged shards. "He has money, Brandon," she hissed. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with panic. "He has to have money hidden here. You said he scrimps on everything. You said he hoards his pension checks. It has to be under the mattress or in the freezer. Old people always hide cash in the freezer." She began ripping open the cabinets. She threw a box of oatmeal onto the floor and stomped on it, sending dust into the air. It was a display of pure animalistic greed. They weren't looking for their father. They weren't looking for an explanation. They were looking for cash to pay for their lifestyle, convinced that I owed it to them. Brandon marched into the bedroom. I switched camera views. He grabbed the thin, lumpy mattress and flipped it over. He took a pocket knife and slashed the fabric, ripping out handfuls of yellow foam padding. Nothing. He screamed in frustration and kicked the bed frame, breaking one of the wooden legs. "This is insane," he yelled. "He cut off my power, Vanessa. He cut off my cards. He is trying to ruin us because I asked for a loan. He is a psychopath. He isn't a psychopath. He is a thief," Vanessa yelled back from the living room. She was pulling books off the shelf and shaking them, hoping bills would fall out. He has been living off us for 10 years, eating our food, using our heat, and he probably has a stash of thousands somewhere in this dump. We deserve that money, Brandon. We earned it by putting up with him. I watched them destroy the meager possessions of the man they thought I was. I felt a strange detachment. It was like watching a nature documentary about scavengers fighting over a carcass. They had no idea that the carcass was a decoy, and the hunter was watching from the sky. Then they found it. I had left the metal lockbox in the bottom drawer of the bedside table. It wasn't hidden very well. I wanted them to find it. I wanted them to pry it open. Inside there was no cash. There were no gold coins. There was a single file folder thick with official-looking documents. Brandon found the box. He shook it. It rattled. His eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Vanessa, I found something." She ran into the bedroom, pushing past him. "Open it. Break it open." Brandon smashed the lockbox against the corner of the dresser until the latch gave way. He tore the lid off. He reached in, expecting stacks of $100 bills. Instead, he pulled out the blue folder. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, disappointed. "It's just papers." "Read it," Brandon said. He opened the file. His eyes scanned the top document. I zoomed in on the camera feed, though I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it said. I had spent a week drafting it with my lawyer to make sure it looked authentic enough to fool a layman, but vague enough to be legally non-binding if scrutinized by a court. It was a notice of default on a home equity line of credit. The address listed on the document was 142 Lakeshore Drive, their mansion. My mansion. The document stated that William Harrington had taken out a loan of $500,000 against the equity of the property, and that the loan was in arrears with foreclosure proceedings imminent. Brandon's face went pale. He dropped the paper as if it were burning his skin. "Oh my God," he whispered. What is it?" Vanessa snatched the paper from the floor. She read it, her lips moving silently. Then she screamed. A sound of pure, unadulterated horror. "He mortgaged the house," she shrieked. "He mortgaged our house." Brandon grabbed the file back. He flipped through the pages. There were fake bank statements showing withdrawals, transfers to offshore accounts, and receipts for gambling debts. All fabricated, all planted. "He stole the equity," Brandon said, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and fury. "That lying, senile old snake. He told us he was broke. He told us he had nothing. But he took out a loan on the house I live in. He took $500,000. Vanessa was pacing the small room, hyperventilating. "That is why he cut the power. That is why he ran away. He took the money and ran. He stole our future, Brandon. That house is ours. We have lived there for a decade. We were supposed to inherit that equity. They truly believed it. They believed the house was theirs by divine right. They ignored the fact that my name was on the deed. They ignored the fact that they had never paid a dime of principal. In their minds, I was merely the custodian of their wealth, and I had just embezzled it." "He spent it on himself," Brandon said, looking at the fake gambling receipts. "Look at this. Casinos. Racetracks. He has a secret life. He has been gambling away my inheritance while I worked my fingers to the bone running his company." The delusion was absolute. Brandon sat on the edge of the ruined bed, holding his head in his hands. "We are going to lose the house, Vanessa. The bank is going to take it. We are going to be homeless." Vanessa stopped pacing. She looked at Brandon, her eyes cold and hard. "No," she said. "We are not going to lose anything. We are going to sue him." "Sue him?" Brandon asked. "Yes, look at this place, Brandon." She gestured to the trashed apartment. "He is mentally unstable. He is a gambling addict. He committed fraud. He mortgaged a property that was promised to us. That is theft. We are going to call the police. We are going to call a lawyer. We are going to charge him with elder fraud and embezzlement. We will get that money back, and we will put him in prison where he belongs." Brandon stood up. A dark resolve settled over his face. "You are right. He stole from us. He stole from his own grandchildren. He endangered our home to feed his addiction." I sat back in my chair in the penthouse. This was the pivot point. If they had just walked away, if they had just accepted that they needed to find their own way, I might have stopped there. I might have let them keep the cars. I might have given them a small severance. But they chose war. They chose to accuse me of stealing my own property. They chose to criminalize the man who had fed them for 40 years. Brandon pulled out his phone. He didn't call me. He didn't call his sister. He dialed 911. "I need to report a crime," I heard him say to the operator. "My father. He has stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and fled. He is dangerous. He has raided our family home's equity and disappeared. Yes, I am at his apartment now. It looks like a struggle occurred here." I raised an eyebrow. He was improvising. He was going to frame his own vandalism as evidence of my instability, or perhaps a struggle to suggest I was in danger to get the police involved faster. I stopped the recording on the security system and saved the file to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I labeled it Evidence B, Breaking and Entering, False Police Report. They stayed in the apartment for another hour, going through every scrap of paper, looking for more evidence of my fictional crimes. They took photos of the damage they had caused, staging the scene to look like I had trashed my own home in a fit of madness. Vanessa even overturned the small table in the kitchen to make it look more dramatic. They were building a narrative. They were going to paint me as a senile, gambling-addicted criminal who needed to be stopped. They were going to use the legal system to try and seize control of the assets they thought I had squandered. It was perfect. By filing a police report and accusing me of fraud regarding the house, they were creating a public record of their claims. They were going on record stating that they believed the house was theirs, and when I revealed the truth that the house was mine, the company was mine, and the debt was fake, they would be on the hook for filing false reports for defamation and for attempting to defraud the actual owner of the property. Me. I watched them leave. They walked out of the broken door with the blue folder tucked under Brandon's arm like a weapon. They looked energized. They had a mission now. They had a villain to fight. They thought they were the heroes of this story, fighting to save their family legacy from a crazy old man. I waited until the Uber picked them up. Then I picked up my phone and called Blackwood. "Arthur," I said. "They took the bait." "Excellent," Blackwood replied. "Did they find the HELOC document?" "They did, and they called the police. They are accusing me of embezzlement." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "They are accusing you of embezzling your own money from your own house, exactly. They are coming for me, Arthur. They are going to try to have me arrested or committed." "Then we proceed to phase 2, Blackwood said. "I will have the deed and the trust documents ready. When do you want to drop the hammer?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them file the lawsuit. Let them go to the authorities. I want them to commit to this lie under penalty of perjury. I want them to stand in front of a judge and claim ownership. Only then do we reveal the reality." "Understood. And the apartment?" "They trashed it. I have it on video." "Good. We add malicious destruction of property to the list." "Stay safe, William. If they find out where you are." "They won't," I said. "They are looking for a broke old man in a gambling den. They aren't looking up." I hung up. I looked around my penthouse. It was time to get ready. If Brandon was going to the police, I needed to be prepared. I needed to look the part. Not the part of the victim, but the part of the victor. I went to the master closet. Inside, preserved in garment bags, were my old suits. The real suits. The ones I wore when I was building skyscrapers, when I was shaking hands with mayors and governors. I unzipped one. It was a navy brioni tailored to perfection. I brushed the fabric. It still felt like power. I shaved. I trimmed my hair. I put on the suit. I tied the silk tie with a Windsor knot. I looked in the mirror. The tired, hunched old man from Thanksgiving dinner was gone. In his place stood William Harrington, the shark of Chicago real estate. I was ready for them to find me. In fact, I was counting on it. Because the next step in their plan I knew would be to leverage the state. If they couldn't get the money by theft, they would get it by force. They would try to use adult protective services. They would try to say I was incompetent. Let them come. I poured another glass of water and sat back down at the computer. I opened the file labeled Medical Records. My physical earlier that month had been flawless. My cognitive tests were in the top percentile. I had the documents ready to print. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the skyscrapers. Down below, the lights were coming on. My son was out there armed with a fake mortgage and a heart full of greed, thinking he was hunting prey. He didn't know he was walking into the mouth of the lion. I did not have to wait long for the next act of my son's theatrical performance. It began less than 2 hours after he trashed my apartment. I was sitting in the back of a Lincoln Town Car, a private service I had kept on retainer for 20 years, under the corporate account parked just down the street from the decoy apartment. I watched as the flashing lights cut through the gray Chicago afternoon. There were 3 squad cars and a white van marked with the city seal. Adult Protective Services. Brandon wasn't just calling the police to report a theft. He was calling the state to report a broken mind. He was going for the jugular. He wanted me institutionalized. If he could get a doctor and a judge to sign off on an emergency temporary guardianship order, he would gain control over my person, and by extension, he believed my assets. He thought he was saving the house. He was actually signing his own warrant. I told the driver to wait. I wanted to see the show. Through the tinted window, I saw Brandon standing on the sidewalk talking to a woman in a heavy parka holding a clipboard. He was gesturing wildly at the broken door of the apartment. Vanessa was beside him, wiping her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the terrified daughter-in-law to perfection. She was pointing at the debris visible through the window, the overturned table, the slashed mattress. "Look at how he lives." I could imagine her screaming. "He is sick. He is dangerous. He destroyed his own home in a fit of rage and ran off with the money." The police officers were nodding, taking notes. They saw a rundown neighborhood, a destroyed apartment, and a well-dressed couple claiming their father had snapped. It fit the narrative. It was the easy answer. Dementia. Paranoia. A sad old man losing his grip. It was time to change the narrative. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. The navy brioni suit was impeccable. The silk tie was perfectly knotted. My hair was groomed. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the man who owned the block. "Drive up," I told the driver. "Stop right in front of the van." The Lincoln glided forward, its black paint gleaming against the dirty snow. We pulled up to the curb, blocking the view of the squad cars. The police officers turned around, hands resting instinctively near their belts. Brandon and Vanessa stopped their performance, looking annoyed at the interruption. They thought it was just a wealthy passerby, or perhaps a politician lost in the South Side. The driver opened my door. I stepped out. The silence that descended on the sidewalk was absolute. Brandon's jaw literally dropped. He blinked once, twice, as if his brain couldn't process the image in front of him. He was expecting a shivering old man in a moth-eaten coat. He was expecting the father he had spit on. Instead, he saw William Harrington. I buttoned my jacket with a deliberate, calm movement. I adjusted my cuffs. I walked toward the group of officers, my leather dress shoes clicking sharply on the pavement. I didn't look at Brandon. I looked straight at the sergeant in charge. Good afternoon, officers, I said. My voice was deep, steady, and carried the authority of a man who had commanded thousand-man construction crews. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding my property. Brandon found his voice. It came out as a high-pitched stutter. Dad. What? Where did you get that suit? He turned to the APS woman, desperation clawing at his throat. You see this. He is spending the money. He is manic. He stole $500,000 and he is out buying costumes. He doesn't even know who he is. He thinks he is some kind of millionaire. Grab him. Before he runs away again, Vanessa chimed in, her eyes wide with greed and confusion. That suit, that looks expensive. Officer, that is the money he stole from the house equity. He is blowing it all. The sergeant, a burly man with a gray mustache, stepped forward. He looked me up and down. He didn't reach for his cuffs. He looked confused. Sir, are you William Harrington? The sergeant asked. I am, I replied. And these two people are my son and daughter-in-law. I understand they have filed a report claiming I am mentally incompetent and a danger to myself. Yes, sir, the APS worker said, stepping around the police. She looked at my suit, then at the trashed apartment, then back at me. The report states you destroyed your residence in a psychotic episode and fled with family assets. We are here to ensure your safety. I chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. My safety is not in question, madam. However, the integrity of that report is. He is lying. Brandon screamed. He lunged toward me, but a young officer held him back. He is sick. Look at the apartment. He tore it apart. He thinks people are watching him. He needs to be committed right now. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. The officers tensed. I moved slowly. I pulled out my smartphone. It wasn't the taped-up brick I used for show. It was the latest model, sleek and expensive. I unlocked it and tapped the screen. I turned the phone toward the sergeant and the APS worker. I would like you to watch this, I said. On the screen, the high-definition footage from the hidden camera played. It showed Brandon kicking down the door. It showed Vanessa sweeping the plates off the counter. It showed Brandon slashing the mattress with his pocket knife. It showed them panting, sweating, and destroying my home with the methodical rage of entitled children. The audio played clearly through the phone speakers. We deserve that money, Brandon. We earned it by putting up with him. The sergeant watched the video. His face went hard. He looked from the screen to the broken door, then to Brandon. Brandon's face drained of color. He looked like a ghost. Vanessa put her hand over her mouth. That's deepfake, Brandon stammered. He is good with computers. He made that up. I swiped to the next video. It was the footage from Thanksgiving dinner, the dining room, the crystal glasses, Brandon screaming, and then the spit, the glob of saliva hitting my face, the silence of the room, my quiet exit. I paused the video on the frame where the spit was sliding down my cheek. Does this look like the behavior of a loving son concerned for his father's mental health? I asked the sergeant. Or does it look like a man who is angry because his ATM stopped dispensing cash? The APS worker lowered her clipboard. She looked at Brandon with undisguised disgust. Mr. Harrington, she said to me, her tone completely changing. It appears we were given false information. The sergeant stepped closer to me. He squinted, looking past the suit, looking at my face. Wait a minute, he said. Harrington. William Harrington. Did you run the Big Dig project in '98, the union contract negotiation? I smiled. It was a cold smile. I sat across the table from the mayor for 3 weeks, Sergeant. I believe you were on the security detail for the strikes. The sergeant's eyes widened. Holy mother of... I thought you retired to Florida. I thought you were dead. I retired to obscurity, Sergeant, I said. I wanted to raise my son without the shadow of my money. I wanted him to build his own character. I failed. I turned to Brandon. He was shaking. He wasn't shaking from the cold anymore. He was shaking because he realized the ground he was standing on, the reality he thought he controlled, was dissolving. You know the police, Brandon whispered. I know the city, Brandon, I said. I built half of it, and I know a liar when I see one. The sergeant turned to Brandon. Sir, you filed a police report stating your father vandalized this property and stole equity from your home. The video clearly shows you destroying the property. And as for the equity, he stole the equity, Brandon yelled, trying to cling to the one lie he thought was true. He took out a loan on my house. I have the papers. He admitted it. I haven't taken a loan on anything, I said calmly. And it is not your house. I pulled a folded document from my pocket. It was a certified copy of the property deed for the mansion at 142 Lakeshore Drive. It listed the owner clearly Harrington Holdings, LLC. Managing member William Harrington. There is no mortgage, I said to the sergeant. The document they found was a draft, a test, a piece of paper I left to see if they would snoop. They did. The house is free and clear, and it belongs to me. The sergeant took the deed. He looked at it. He looked at Brandon. Sir, he said to my son, you are skating on very thin ice. You have filed a false police report. You have wasted city resources. You have committed vandalism. And you are attempting to use adult protective services as a weapon for financial gain. Vanessa grabbed Brandon's arm. Let's go, she hissed. Brandon, stop talking. Let's go. No, Brandon pulled away. He looked at me with wild eyes. This is a trick. He is tricking all of you. He is senile. He is wearing a costume. He doesn't have any money. He clips coupons. He eats canned soup. I stepped closer to him. I invaded his personal space. I smelled his expensive cologne now mixed with the sour scent of fear. I eat canned soup because I like it, Brandon, I said softly so only he could hear. And I clipped coupons so I could save the $12,000 a month I spent keeping your lights on. But I am not senile, and I am not confused. I am teaching you a lesson about ownership. You thought you owned me. You thought I was an asset you could liquidate. I leaned back. Sergeant, I said, I do not wish to press charges for the vandalism at this time. It is a family matter. I am handling it. The sergeant nodded slowly. He understood. He saw the game. Are you sure, Mr. Harrington? I can take them in right now for filing a false report. Not yet, I said. Let them go. They have a long walk home. I turned and walked back to the Lincoln. The driver held the door open. I paused and looked back at them. They were standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by the police they had called, looking small, petty, and utterly defeated. The APS worker was already walking back to her van, shaking her head. The police were getting back in their cars, the show over. Brandon stood there staring at me. For the first time in his life, he looked at me and didn't see a father. He saw a stranger. He saw a titan, and he was terrified. I got into the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, shutting out the cold and the noise. Take me to the club, I told the driver. I need a drink. As we pulled away, I saw Brandon pull out his phone. He was probably calling his lawyer. He was probably calling the bank. He was going to try to find out who Harrington Holdings was. He was going to try to fight. Good. Because the next document on my desk wasn't a fake mortgage. It was real. It was an eviction notice. And it had a 72-hour timer on it. He wanted to play the victim. I was going to give him a reason to cry. 72 hours. That is how long it takes for a human body to succumb to dehydration. It is also, coincidentally, the exact amount of time the state of Illinois gives a squatter to vacate a premises once a legal eviction order has been served for cause. Saturday morning broke over Chicago with the kind of gray, flat light that promises snow. I was awake at 5:00 a.m. sitting in my penthouse tracking the location of the process server on my iPad. He was a professional, a man named Victor, who specialized in serving high-risk targets. He was parked 2 blocks away from the mansion, drinking coffee, waiting for the lights to come on. Or rather, waiting for movement, since I had cut the lights 2 days ago. I imagined the scene inside the house at 142 Lakeshore Drive. The temperature would be hovering around 40 degrees. They would be huddled under blankets, wearing coats indoors, likely burning my antique furniture in the fireplace because the gas was shut off. They were suffering, but they were still arrogant. They still believed this was a temporary glitch, a tantrum by a senile old man that would be fixed as soon as the courts opened on Monday. They were about to learn that the court system was not their savior. It was my hammer. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, Victor walked up the driveway. I switched to the security camera feed on my laptop. I had reactivated the external cameras remotely, using a backup battery system they didn't know existed. I watched Victor ring the doorbell. No answer. He knocked, a heavy, authoritative thud. The door opened. Brandon stood there. He looked like a wreck. He was wearing 3 sweaters and a beanie. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at Victor with a mixture of hope and fear. He probably thought it was the power company coming to apologize. "Brandon Harrington?" Victor asked. "Yes," Brandon croaked. "Are you here to turn the heat back on?" Victor didn't smile. He extended a thick manila envelope. "You have been served." He turned and walked away before Brandon could even grip the paper. I zoomed in. Brandon tore the envelope open right there on the porch, his breath puffing in the freezing air. He pulled out the document. It wasn't a competency hearing notice. It wasn't a negotiation offer. It was a notice to quit. An immediate eviction order citing gross negligence, destruction of property, and failure to maintain the premises. I saw his knees buckle. He grabbed the doorframe to hold himself up. He read it again. Then he ran inside, slamming the door. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Arthur Blackwood. I put him on speaker. "It is done," William Arthur said. "The clock is ticking. Tuesday morning at 8:00 a.m. the sheriff will be there to remove them if they are not gone." "They won't leave, Arthur," I said. "They are like barnacles. They need to be scraped off." "Go there." "To the house, yes. I want you to explain the reality of their situation to them. They think this is a dispute between a father and a son. I want them to understand this is a dispute between a trespasser and a corporation. And Arthur, yes. Wear your best suit. Intimidate him." I watched on the camera as Arthur's black Mercedes pulled into the driveway an hour later. Brandon ran out of the house before the car even stopped. He looked frantic. He recognized Arthur. He thought the cavalry had arrived. He thought Arthur, who had been my lawyer for 30 years, was there to help him because he still believed he was the heir to the kingdom. Arthur stepped out of the car. He stood 6'4", immaculate in a cashmere overcoat. He didn't offer his hand. "Arthur," Brandon yelled, running down the steps. "Thank God you have to stop him. He is insane. He sent a guy with an eviction notice. You have to file an injunction. You represent the family." Arthur stood still, looking down at my shivering son. "I do not represent the family, Brandon," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the microphone I had embedded in the porch light. "I represent Harrington Holdings, LLC. Brandon stopped. "What?" "What is Harrington Holdings?" "It is the entity that owns this property," Arthur said calmly. "It is the entity that owns the car you drove until yesterday. It is the entity that owns the company you used to work for." Brandon looked confused. "But Dad owns those things." No, Arthur corrected him. "Your father owns Harrington Holdings. He is the sole managing member. You, Brandon, have no equity. You have no shares. You have no title." "But the house," Brandon stammered. "He gave it to us. We have lived here for 10 years. It was a wedding gift." "Did you sign a deed?" Arthur asked. "No, but..." "Did you sign a mortgage?" "No." Did you pay property taxes? Brandon went silent. Then you are a tenant at will, Arthur said. You are a guest, and the landlord has revoked your invitation. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises and remove your personal effects. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and auctioned to recoup the damages you caused to the rental unit on the south side. Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. But where are we supposed to go? We have no money. He froze the accounts. That is not the concern of Harrington Holdings, Arthur said coldly. You are 40 years old, Brandon. I suggest you find a job. Arthur turned to leave. Wait, Vanessa screamed. She had come out onto the porch wrapped in a duvet. She looked wild. This is illegal. You can't just kick us out in the winter. We have rights. We have squatters' rights. You are not squatters, Arthur said without turning around. You are trespassers, and if you damage one more piece of fixtures in that house, Mr. Harrington has instructed me to press criminal charges for vandalism. Good day. Arthur got in his car and drove away. Brandon and Vanessa were left standing in the snow, staring at the empty driveway. The reality was finally hitting them. They owned nothing. They were nothing. They were just parasites on a host that had finally decided to take some medicine. I watched them go back inside. I switched to the interior cameras. The living room was dark. They sat on the expensive Italian sofa, huddled together for warmth. What are we going to do? Brandon whispered. He sounds terrified. He really owns it all, Ness. He set it up so he owns everything. We are destitute. Vanessa stood up. She began pacing the room, her duvet trailing behind her like a royal train. No, she said. Her voice was hard. No. I am not going back to a 2-bedroom apartment. I am not going to be the laughingstock of the PTA. We are not leaving this house. We have to, Brandon said. The sheriff is coming in 3 days. Think Brandon. Vanessa snapped. Why does he own it all? Because he is a control freak. But he is old. He forgets things. What are you talking about? Vanessa stopped pacing. She looked at the fireplace. She looked at the antique desk in the corner. That desk. That is where he used to keep his papers before he moved to the apartment. Right. Yeah, so maybe he signed something years ago that he forgot about. She said, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Maybe he signed a deed transferring the house to us when we got married and we just misplaced it. Brandon looked at her. You mean fake it? I mean find it, Vanessa corrected him. Look, nobody knows how he runs his business. It's all shell companies and secret accounts. If we produce a document, a quitclaim deed dated 10 years ago, notarized, who is to say it isn't real? He is 72. We already filed a police report saying he is senile. If we produce a deed now, it proves he forgot he gave it to us. It proves he is confused. Brandon hesitated. That is forgery, Vanessa. That is a felony. If we get caught, we won't get caught, she hissed. Who is the judge going to believe, a successful young couple with children, or a crazy old man who trashes his own apartment and disappears? We submit the deed to the county recorder. Once it is filed, it is legal record. We own the house. He can't evict us from a house we own. I sat forward in my chair in the penthouse. I couldn't believe my luck. I had hoped they would fight. I had hoped they would try to sue. But I never dared to dream they would be stupid enough to commit federal fraud. I watched as Brandon's resistance crumbled. He was weak. He had always been weak. He looked at his wife, then at the cold, dark room. How do we do it? He asked. We need a notary stamp. We need the right paper. Vanessa smiled. It was a shark's smile. My cousin works at a title company. He owes me a favor. And we have that old typewriter in the attic. the one your dad used to use. If we type it up, it will look authentic. It will look like he did it himself years ago." I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. The typewriter. The old Remington I kept in the attic as a decoration. They were going to use my own machine to try and steal my house. I watched them run up the stairs. I switched cameras to the attic feed. They were frantic, digging through boxes until they found the dusty black case. They pulled out the typewriter. They found a stack of yellowing legal paper I had left in a drawer up there years ago. They spent the next 4 hours drafting the document. I watched them argue over the wording. I watched them look up legal templates on their phones using the weak cellular data signal. I watched Brandon practice my signature over and over again on a scrap piece of paper until he got it right. "This is it," Brandon said, holding up the final document. "A quitclaim deed dated November 2013, transferring the property at 142 Lakeshore Drive from William Harrington to Brandon and Vanessa Harrington for the sum of $1. "It looks real," Vanessa whispered. "It looks perfect." "We file it Monday morning," Brandon said. "First thing, as soon as the recorder of deeds opens. We file it, then we show it to the sheriff." I poured myself another glass of water. I felt a strange sense of pity for them. They were like children trying to draw a dollar bill with crayons to buy candy. They didn't understand the world they were playing in. They didn't know that modern forensic document analysis can date ink to the month of its production. They didn't know that the paper they were using while old had a watermark that was discontinued in 2000. But the ink ribbon in that typewriter, that was the trap. I had replaced the ribbon in that typewriter 6 months ago when I was feeling nostalgic and wanted to write a letter. I bought a new ribbon online, a synthetic blend ribbon that didn't exist 10 years ago. If they filed that document, they weren't just stopping an eviction. They were handing me the keys to their prison cell. I picked up my phone and texted Arthur. "Let them file it," I wrote. Arthur replied instantly. "You are a cruel man, William." "I am a teacher," I replied. "And the final exam is Monday morning." I watched them celebrate. They found a bottle of wine that I hadn't inventoried and opened it. They toasted to their brilliance. They toasted to saving the house. They toasted to defeating the old man. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy the warmth of the alcohol. Because Monday is coming, and Monday brings the fire. Sunday afternoon in Chicago is usually a time for rest, for watching football, for staying warm. But at 142 Lakeshore Drive, my son was trying to rewrite reality with a spatula and a bag of charcoal. I watched from the end of the block as smoke billowed from the backyard of the mansion. It was 20 degrees outside. The snow was piled high against the fences. Yet there was Brandon wearing a thick parka over his cashmere sweater, standing by the expensive gas grill I had paid for flipping burgers for a group of 6 shivering people. He was hosting a barbecue. In the dead of winter, with no electricity and no running water inside the house. It was a display of delusion so profound, it was almost impressive. He was trying to prove to his friends, and perhaps to himself, that everything was normal. He wanted to show them that the Harrington legacy was still intact, that the rumors of his ruin were exaggerated. He had probably told them the power outage was a grid maintenance issue. He was laughing, holding a beer, playing the role of the benevolent host, while his world was seconds away from being incinerated. I checked my watch. It was 2:00 p.m. The timing was specific. I wanted an audience. I signaled the driver. We didn't just drive up. We led a convoy. Behind my Lincoln was a heavy-duty pickup truck carrying a construction crew, a locksmith van, and a nondescript sedan containing the director of the Safe Haven Foundation. And behind them, silent but present, was a police cruiser I had requested for civil standby to keep the peace during a property transfer. We pulled up to the curb. I saw the guests in the backyard stop talking. They looked over the fence. They saw the flashing lights of the police car. They saw the trucks. Brandon froze, his spatula hovering over a half-cooked burger. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing my charcoal overcoat and leather gloves. I didn't walk to the front door. I walked to the edge of the lawn right next to the driveway, where Vanessa's repossessed Porsche used to sit. Two men jumped out of the pickup truck. They were carrying a massive wooden post and a sign. They didn't ask for permission. They drove the post into the frozen earth with a sledgehammer. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like gunshots. Brandon came running from the backyard, slipping on the icy driveway. His friends followed, curious and confused. Vanessa appeared at the front door, wrapped in blankets, looking like a specter. "What are you doing?" Brandon screamed. He looked unhinged. His eyes were wild, bloodshot from stress and sleeplessness. "Get away from my house. I am calling the cops," I pointed to the police officer who was already standing by his car, arms crossed, watching. "The police are already here, Brandon," I said calmly. Brandon looked at the officer, then back at me. He saw the sign the workmen were hanging. It was a red and white sign, but it didn't say "for sale." It said "sold." He laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. "You can't sell it. We own it. We have the deed. We are filing it tomorrow. You can't sell a house that isn't yours." I ignored him. I turned to the sedan. The door opened, and Sarah Jenkins stepped out. She was a woman of 50, tough as nails, who had spent her life running shelters for victims of domestic violence. She had seen the worst of humanity, so a spoiled man-child like Brandon didn't scare her. She was holding a set of keys. "Brandon," I said, my voice projecting clearly to his friends who were huddled by the garage. "I did not sell this house to a stranger, and I did not sell it for profit. I sold it this morning." I handed Sarah a single document. It was the bill of sale. "I sold it for $1, I said. The guests gasped. $1. Brandon stopped breathing. $1. "You gave my inheritance away for $1. I didn't give it away," I corrected him. "I transferred it to the Safe Haven Foundation. This property will no longer house your vanity. Starting today, it will be a sanctuary for women and children who have actually suffered. People who know the value of a roof over their heads. People who would never spit in the face of the hand that feeds them." Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look at Brandon. She looked at the house. "It needs work," she said to me. "But it has good bones. We can fit 5 families in here comfortably." She turned to the locksmith. "Change the locks. All of them. Front back garage. Now." Brandon lunged. He didn't think. He just reacted. The realization that he had lost, that the deed he had spent all night forging was useless because I had unloaded the asset before he could file it, broke his mind. He screamed a primal roar of entitlement and threw himself at the locksmith. He punched the man in the shoulder, trying to knock the drill out of his hand. "Get away! It's mine! It's my house!" It happened in slow motion. The police officer didn't hesitate. He wasn't there to evict anyone. He was there to keep the peace, and Brandon had just committed assault in plain view. The officer tackled Brandon into the snowbank. Brandon flailed, kicking and screaming like a toddler. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" "Brandon Harrington, you are under arrest for assault and battery," the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto Brandon's wrists. The metal clicked shut. It was the sound of a final door closing. Brandon was face down in the snow, his expensive parka covered in mud. He lifted his head, spitting snow out of his mouth. He looked at me. "Dad." "Help me tell him it's a mistake." I looked down at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just the cold satisfaction of a job completed on schedule. "It is not a mistake," I said. "It is a consequence." Vanessa ran down the steps. She didn't run to Brandon. She didn't try to stop the police. She ran straight to me. She threw herself at my feet, clutching the hem of my coat. "William, please," she wailed. The tears were flowing freely now, freezing on her cheeks. I didn't want to do any of this. Brandon made me do it." He told me we had to take the house. He told me to forge the deed. I wanted to leave. I swear, I wanted to call you. I looked down at her. The woman who had sneered at my clothes. The woman who had banned me from giving candy to my grandchildren. The woman who had called me a burden 3 days ago. Now she was selling out her husband before the handcuffs were even cold. He made you forge the deed, I asked softly. Yes. Yes, she cried, nodding frantically. He is crazy, William. He is obsessed with the money. I was scared of him. Please don't throw me out. I have nowhere to go. The kids. Think of the kids. I looked over at the guests. They were backing away, getting into their cars, fleeing the scene of the disaster. They had seen the truth. They had seen the Harringtons for what they were. Vanessa, I said, I am thinking of the kids. That is why I have already spoken to your sister in Ohio. She is expecting you and the twins tonight. I bought you 3 bus tickets. They are in the mailbox. Bus tickets, she whispered, horrified. It is a 12-hour ride, I said. You have plenty of time to think about your choices. But the house, she stammered. The house belongs to Sarah now, I said, and she has a strict policy. No abusers, no manipulators, and no trespassers. Sarah walked up the steps past the sobbing Vanessa. The locksmith was already drilling into the front door. The sound of the drill was loud and mechanical. It signified the end of an era. The officer hauled Brandon to his feet. He was crying now. Ugly, heaving sobs. He looked at Vanessa, who was still kneeling in the snow, refusing to look at him. He looked at the house where the locksmith was discarding his keys. He looked at me. Why, he choked out. Why did you do this? I am your son. I stepped closer to him. I wanted him to hear this clearly. Because you spit on me, Brandon. You didn't just spit on my face, you spit on 40 years of my life. You spit on the memory of your mother. You thought you were a king because you lived in a castle I built, but you never learned the most important rule of construction. I leaned in. If the foundation is rotten, you tear the house down. The officer led him away. They put him in the back of the cruiser. He pressed his face against the glass, watching, as the locksmith opened the front door and Sarah walked in to claim her property. Vanessa stood up slowly. She looked at the bus tickets I had mentioned. She looked at the empty driveway. She realized there was no negotiation. There was no charm offensive that would work here. She turned and walked into the house to pack her bags under the supervision of the charity staff. She had 1 hour to vacate. I turned to the driver. Take me to the airport, I said. The airport, sir. I have a flight to catch. I didn't look back as we drove away. I didn't need to see the house again. It was just wood and brick. The home I had tried to build there had been destroyed a long time ago. I had simply cleared the rubble. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur Blackwood. Did he sign the confession, I asked? Not yet, Arthur said. But he will. He is in a holding cell. He is facing charges for assault, filing a false police report, and attempted fraud with that deed they were cooking up. He will trade the house for a plea deal in a heartbeat. Good, I said. Make sure the charity gets the title clear and free by end of day. It is already done, William. And Brandon. What do you want me to do when he calls for bail? I looked out the window at the frozen lake. Tell him the bank is closed, Arthur. Tell him the owner has left the country. I sat back in the leather seat. The tension that had been holding my body together for the last 4 days began to release. My hands stopped shaking. The anger which had been a hot white flame in my chest cooled into ash. I wasn't happy. No father is happy to destroy his son. But I was at peace. I had corrected a mistake. I had balanced the ledger. I took the black debit card out of my wallet. I looked at it one last time. I wouldn't need it where I was going. I rolled down the window and flicked it out onto the highway. It disappeared into the gray slush. I was done being the wallet. I was done being the target. I was William Harrington, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Monday morning came with the metallic taste of stale coffee and the smell of industrial cleaner inside the Cook County precinct. I sat behind the one-way glass of Interrogation Room B, watching my son try to dig his way out of a hole by using a shovel made of dynamite. Brandon had spent the night in a holding cell, still wearing his mud-stained parka and expensive trousers. He looked haggard, his eyes darting around the room with the manic energy of a trapped rat, but there was something else in his posture. A smugness, a secret confidence. He sat across from Detective Miller, the officer who had arrested him for assaulting the locksmith. Brandon wasn't groveling anymore. He was leaning forward, tapping a folded piece of paper on the metal table. "You have to let me go," Brandon said, his voice raspy from shouting. "I didn't assault anyone. I was defending my property. That man was drilling into my front door. In the state of Illinois, a homeowner has the right to protect his dwelling from intruders." Detective Miller looked unimpressed. He had seen 1,000 guys like Brandon, rich kids who thought the law was a customer service department they could bully. Mr. Harrington, Miller said tiredly, "We have the owner on record. It's a charity. You were evicted. You were trespassing." "No." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "That is the lie. My father sold a house he didn't own. He is senile. He forgot he gave it to me." He pushed the folded paper toward the detective. It was the document I had watched them forge in the attic. The fake quitclaim deed. "Look at this," Brandon demanded. A quitclaim deed, dated November 12, 2013, signed by William Harrington. Notarized. It transfers the property to me and Vanessa. We found it in his old desk files. He gave it to us as a wedding gift and forgot. That house is mine, which means he committed fraud by selling it, and I was legally defending my home. Arrest him. Arrest the locksmith. And let me out of here. I watched through the glass. I didn't smile. Smiling implies joy. I felt no joy. I felt the cold, clinical satisfaction of a structural engineer watching a bridge collapse exactly as predicted during a stress test. Detective Miller picked up the document. He looked at it. It looked authentic. The paper was yellowed. The font was from an old typewriter. The signature looked like mine. To a layman, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. "I need to verify this," Miller said. "Verify it all you want," Brandon sneered. "It's real. And when you realize you arrested the wrong man, I am going to sue this department for every dime you have." Miller stood up and walked out of the room. He met me and Arthur Blackwood in the hallway. He held the document in a plastic evidence bag. "Mr. Harrington," Miller said to me, "your son claims this deed proves ownership. If this is real, the sale to the charity is void, and his assault charge might get downgraded to a misunderstanding." "Did you sign this?" When I looked at the paper, it was a masterful forgery. Brandon had spent hours practicing the loop of my W and the sharp cross of my H. "I did not sign it," I said, "but don't take my word for it." Arthur stepped forward. He was holding his briefcase like a weapon. "Detective, we anticipated this move. In fact, we were counting on it. We would like to formally accuse Brandon Harrington of forgery, uttering a false document, and attempted grand larceny." Miller raised an eyebrow. "That's a heavy charge. Can you prove it's a fake?" "It looks pretty old." Arthur smiled. It was the smile of a shark smelling blood in the water. "We can prove it to the second." "May we enter the room?" Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Come on in, but keep it civil." We walked into the interrogation room. Brandon looked up. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with triumph. "There he is, the con artist!" Brandon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Tell him, Dad. Tell him about the deed. You thought you could sell my house out from under me, but I found the paper. I found the proof. You forgot. You signed it, didn't you? Your brain is rotting." I sat down opposite him. Arthur remained standing, opening his briefcase on the table. "Hello, Brandon," I said. My voice was calm. It filled the small room. "Don't hello me," Brandon spat. "Admit it. You gave us the house. This document proves it." I looked at the document inside the plastic bag. "It does look very convincing," I said. "The paper is the right weight. The typewriter font is the classic Courier from my old Remington." "Exactly," Brandon crowed. "Because you typed it 10 years ago," Arthur cleared his throat. He pulled a small bound report from his briefcase and slid it toward the detective. Detective Arthur said, "This is an affidavit from the ink manufacturer Century Office Supplies." Brandon frowned. What Arthur continued, ignoring him. "Mr. Harrington keeps an old Remington typewriter in his attic. It is a beautiful machine. 6 months ago, Mr. Harrington decided to restore it. He ordered a new ribbon online." So what Brandon interrupted, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "He changed the ribbon." "Big deal." "It is a big deal, Brandon," I said softly. "Because the ribbon I bought wasn't available 10 years ago." Arthur pointed to the report. "The ribbon in that machine uses a specific synthetic black ink formula called Carbon X7. It was developed to be eco-friendly and smudge-resistant. It was patented in 2022. And it only went into production 14 months ago." The room went silent. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to get louder. Brandon stared at the document. He stared at Arthur. "What? What are you saying?" Brandon whispered. "I am saying," Arthur said, his voice hard as granite, "that it is chemically impossible for a document typed in 2013 to contain ink that wasn't invented until 2022. I leaned in. I wanted to see his eyes. I wanted to see the moment the hope died. "You used my typewriter, Brandon," I said. "You went into my attic. You found the old paper I kept there. And you typed this up Saturday night. You thought you were being clever. You thought you were using the tools of the past to steal your future. But you forgot one thing. I am always 10 steps ahead of you." Brandon's mouth opened and closed. No. That's... Maybe you changed the ribbon years ago. Maybe... "The formula didn't exist," Arthur repeated. "Mass spectrometry will confirm it in an hour. But we don't even need that. We have the receipt for the ribbon purchase dated June of this year. And we have the security camera footage of you and Vanessa entering the attic at 9:45 p.m. on Saturday and carrying the typewriter down to the living room." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. The video was queued up. I pressed play. There it was. Grainy but undeniable. Brandon carrying the black case. Vanessa holding the stack of yellow paper. They were laughing. They were drinking my wine. They were conspiring to commit a felony. Detective Miller looked at the video. Then he looked at the deed. Then he looked at Brandon. "Well," Miller said, his voice dripping with disdain. "That changes things." Brandon started to shake. It wasn't the angry shaking from before. It was the trembling of a creature that realizes the trap has snapped shut. "Dad," he whimpered. "Dad, please." It was Vanessa. She made me do it. She said it was the only way. I didn't want to. I just wanted to save my home. "It wasn't your home," I said. "It never was." I turned to Arthur. "Arthur, please add the charges to the file." Arthur nodded. "Detective, we are filing a formal complaint for forgery of a legal instrument, attempted fraud in excess of $1 million, and perjury for submitting false evidence to a police investigation." Brandon stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. "You can't do this. I am your son. You are sending me to prison, over a house, over money." I stood up too. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my hand. I just looked at him with the weight of 40 years of disappointment. Not over money, Brandon. Over the spit. He froze. You spit in my face, I said. You treated me like garbage because you thought I had no value. You tried to steal from me because you thought I was weak. And when you got caught, you tried to frame me as senile to strip me of my dignity. This isn't about the house. This is about the fact that you are a bad man. And bad men face consequences. Miller stood up and unclipped his handcuffs. Stand up, Mr. Harrington. Turn around. Brandon looked at me, tears streaming down his face. Real ugly tears of terror. Dad. Dad, stop him. I'm sorry. I'll give it back. I'll sign whatever you want. Don't let them take me to county. I watched the detective cuff him. The click of the metal was the period at the end of a very long sentence. You have nothing to give back, Brandon, I said. You have nothing left to sign. I turned and walked to the door. Arthur followed me. Dad. Brandon screamed. Dad. I closed the heavy steel door behind me. The scream was cut off instantly. In the hallway, Miller caught up to us. Mr. Harrington, he said. That was thorough. I don't do things by half measures, Detective, I said. Miller looked at the file in his hand. With the forgery and the amount of money involved in the property value, this is a Class 1 felony. He is looking at 4 to 15 years. And that's before we add the assault on the locksmith. Good, I said. He needs time to think. He has never had to think in his life. What about the wife? Miller asked. She is in the video too. She is, I said. But she is a follower. She will turn on him to save herself. Let her go for now. Let her experience the world without his protection. Without my money. Let her see how much her vanity is worth on the open market. We walked out of the station into the bright, cold sunlight. The air tasted cleaner. What now? William Arthur asked as we walked to his car. Now, I said, checking my watch. I have a board meeting to attend. A board meeting? Arthur asked, confused. You retired. I am the majority shareholder of Harrington Supply, Arthur, and I believe the CEO has just been arrested for a felony. It is time to clean house. Brandon thought his life ended when he lost the house. He was wrong. His life ended when he tried to be smarter than the man who taught him how to read. He wanted to play the victim fine. I was going to make sure he played the role in a cage. But first, I had one more stop. I had to go to the company. I had to strip him of the last thing he had left. His ego. He prided himself on being a businessman. He walked around that office like a king. I was going to walk in there and show them who the emperor really was. And I was going to do it wearing the suit he spit on. No, wait. I was wearing the Brioni. Even better. I was going to do it looking like the man who owned them all. Drive me to the warehouse, Arthur, I said. I want to fire my son. Bail in the state of Illinois is a privilege, not a right, but Brandon managed to scrape together the 10% bond by pawning Vanessa's jewelry and emptying his children's college savings accounts. He walked out of the county jail on Tuesday morning, smelling of sweat and desperation. He didn't go to his wife. He didn't go to a hotel. He went to the one place where he still believed he was a god. He went to Harrington Supply. I was waiting for him, not in the lobby but in the shadows of the boardroom, watching the security feeds. I knew exactly what he was going to do because a man who has lost his home and his reputation has only one move left. He tries to steal enough money to run. Brandon stormed into the office building at 10 a.m. He walked past the receptionist without a word, ignoring her startled greeting. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled from a night in a cell, his tie was missing, and his eyes were manic. He marched straight to the finance department. I watched on the monitor as he cornered the chief financial officer, a quiet man named Gary, who had been trying to retire for 3 years, but stayed because I paid him a bonus to keep an eye on my son. Brandon was screaming, waving his hands. He was demanding an immediate wire transfer of $200,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. He called it a vendor payment. Gary knew it was a getaway fund. "Do it now, Gary!" Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. "I am the CEO of this company. I sign your checks. If you don't authorize the transfer in 5 minutes..." "You are fired." Gary looked terrified. He stammered, looking at his computer screen. Brandon pushed him aside and grabbed the keyboard. He was going to do it himself. He was going to drain the operating capital of the company that employed 50 local families just to save his own skin. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. It was time to end the charade. I walked out of the boardroom and down the hall. The employees fell silent as I passed. They didn't know who I was. To them, I was just an old man in an expensive suit. But they sensed the energy. They sensed the storm. I pushed open the door to the finance office. Brandon was frantically typing his password into the banking portal. "Access denied" flashed on the screen in big red letters. He typed it again. "Access denied." He slammed his fist on the desk. "What is wrong with this thing, Gary? Fix it." "It isn't broken, Brandon," I said from the doorway. "Your access has been revoked." Brandon spun around. He looked at me, and for a second he looked like he was going to attack me again. But the memory of the handcuffs was too fresh. He backed up against the desk, breathing hard. "You," he hissed. "You hacked the system. You interfered with my business. Get out of here, Dad. This is Harrington Supply. I built this company. I am the owner. You have no power here." I walked into the room. Gary stood up and moved to the side, keeping his head down. "You built nothing, Brandon," I said calmly. "You inherited a title. You didn't inherit the work. I built this from the ground up." Brandon screamed, his face turning purple. "I took it from a small supplier to a regional player. I did that hot. Retired. You were feeding pigeons in the park." While I was closing deals, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound binder. I threw it on the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "Open it," I said. Brandon looked at the binder. He didn't move. "Open it," I commanded. My voice wasn't a shout. It was a crack of thunder. He opened the binder with trembling fingers. The first page was a purchase agreement dated 5 years ago. It detailed the acquisition of Harrington Supply from its previous owners, who were on the verge of bankruptcy. The buyer listed was not Brandon Harrington. It was William Harrington. "I bought this company 5 years ago, Brandon," I said. "You ran your first startup into the ground. You were drowning in debt. You came to me crying, saying you were a failure. I didn't bail you out directly because I knew you would just waste the money. So I bought this company anonymously. I installed you as CEO. I gave you a salary of $300,000 a year. I gave you a chance to prove yourself." Brandon stared at the document. The paper shook in his hands. You own it," he whispered. "I own 100% of the shares I said. You have 0 equity. You have an employment contract. And do you know what that contract says about embezzlement?" "I didn't embezzle anything," he shouted, trying to regain his footing. "I used company funds for business development." I flipped the page in the binder. It was a spreadsheet of expenses. $40,000 for Italian marble flooring, I read. Installed at 142 Lake Shore Drive. $15,000 for a heated driveway. Installed at 142 Lake Shore Drive. $12,000 for a custom wine cellar. Installed at 142 Lake Shore Drive. I looked up at him. "You used the company accounts to renovate a house you didn't own, Brandon. That is not business development. That is grand larceny. You were stealing from the payroll to build a palace for your ego." The employees were gathered outside the glass walls of the office now. They were listening. They were watching their tyrant king fall. "You set me up," Brandon muttered. You let me do it. You watched me do it. I watched you dig your own grave, I corrected him. I gave you a rope hoping you would climb. Instead, you made a noose. I turned to Gary. Gary, please initiate security protocol Alpha. Gary nodded. He typed a command into his computer. The building's alarm chirped once. Brandon, I said, you are hereby terminated from your position as CEO of Harrington Supply effective immediately. The cause is theft, fraud, and gross incompetence. You are banned from the premises. If you return, you will be arrested for trespassing. Again. I am not leaving, Brandon yelled. This is my office. This is my chair. Two large men in security uniforms entered the room. They weren't the usual night watchmen. They were private security contractors I had hired that morning. They didn't look like they were in the mood for debate. Mr. Harrington, one of them said to Brandon, please come with us. Brandon looked at them. He looked at me. He realized it was over. The illusion of the self-made man, the successful executive, the master of the universe, evaporated. He was just a thief in a dirty suit. Fine, he spat. Keep your garbage company. It's worthless anyway. Without me, I made the deals, the clients love me. They will leave with me. I will start my own firm and crush you. He stormed toward the door. Wait, I said. He stopped, hoping I was going to offer him a deal. Hoping I would give him a severance package. I am not done, I said. I looked past him into the crowd of employees gathered in the hall. I saw a young man named David. He was a junior logistics manager. He was 28 years old, smart, hardworking, and honest. For 3 years, I had watched Brandon bully him. I had watched Brandon steal David's ideas and present them as his own. I had watched Brandon scream at David for mistakes Brandon had made. David supported a wife and a sick mother on a salary Brandon spent on lunch. David, please come in here, I called out. David walked into the office looking nervous. He adjusted his glasses. Yes, sir. Brandon laughed. David. You are calling David. The kid is a moron. He can barely tie his shoes. David, I said, ignoring my son. Do you know the supply chain logistics for the upcoming Midtown project? Yes, sir, David said. I wrote the proposal. I know you did, I said, even though Brandon put his name on the cover. I turned to my son. You think you are indispensable, Brandon. You think you are the brain. But you are just a parasite. You fed off the work of good people like David. You treated them like dirt because it made you feel tall. I turned back to David. David, as of this moment, you are the interim CEO of Harrington Supply. Your salary is tripled. You report directly to me. David's eyes went wide. Brandon looked like he was going to have a stroke. Brandon shrieked. You are giving my company to the coffee boy. I am giving the company to the man who actually does the work, I said. Get him out of here, I signaled the guards. They grabbed Brandon by the arms. He didn't fight this time. He went limp. The fight had left him. He was dragged out of the office past the employees he had terrorized for 5 years. They didn't look away. They watched him go. And as he passed the reception desk, someone started to clap. Then another. Then another. By the time Brandon was thrown out onto the sidewalk, the entire building was applauding. They weren't applauding me. They were applauding the end of his reign. I walked to the window and looked down. Brandon was standing on the curb. He looked small. He looked lost. He had no car. His phone was disconnected. He had no job. He had no home. He looked up at the window. He saw me. I didn't wave. I simply closed the blinds. I turned to David, who was still standing in shock. Get to work, son, I said. We have a company to save. I walked out of the office. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I had just amputated a limb to save the body. It was necessary, but it left a scar. I got back into my Lincoln. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to now, Mr. Harrington?" "The hotel," I said. "They will be there." "They?" "My son and his wife. They have nowhere else to go. They will go to where the money is. They will come to beg." And I had one last thing to give them. Not money. Not a second chance. I had a plane ticket and a bill. "Drive," I said. "Let's finish this." I stood on the balcony of the hotel suite watching the snow fall on Chicago for the last time. It was a heavy, wet snow, the kind that covers everything in a blanket of silence. But down on the street, 40 floors below, there was no silence. There was only the sound of desperation. My son Brandon and his wife Vanessa were kneeling on the sidewalk right in front of the revolving brass doors of the hotel. They looked nothing like the arrogant socialites who had hosted Thanksgiving dinner just a week ago. Brandon's coat was torn at the shoulder, likely from a scuffle in the holding cell. Vanessa's hair was matted, her face swollen from days of crying. They had lost the house. They had lost the company. They had lost their reputation. And now, facing a trial that would almost certainly end with a 5 to 10-year prison sentence for fraud and forgery, they had come to lose their dignity. They were screaming my name. They were begging the doorman to let them up. They were causing a scene not to show off, but to survive. They knew I was their only way out. They thought that if they cried hard enough, if they prostrated themselves in the slush, the father who had paid their bills for a decade would crack. They thought I would come down, write a check for their legal defense, and make the nightmares go away. I turned away from the window. I didn't feel a pull in my chest. I didn't feel the urge to go down there and hold my son. That part of me had died the moment his saliva hit my face. What I felt was a profound, quiet relief. The surgery was over. The tumor was gone. I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. Mr. Harrington, the concierge, answered immediately. "We apologize for the disturbance outside. The police are on their way to remove them." "Cancel the police," I said. "Send the head of security out. I have left an envelope at the desk. Have him deliver it to the man kneeling in the snow. Tell him it is from me." "Certainly, sir." I watched on the monitor as the head of security, a large man in a black coat, walked out of the hotel. Brandon scrambled to his feet when he saw the man. He reached out, his hands shaking, thinking I had sent down a check, thinking I had sent a lifeline. Vanessa grabbed Brandon's arm, her eyes wide with hope. The guard didn't speak. He simply extended his hand and gave Brandon the thick, cream-colored envelope. Then he turned around and walked back inside, leaving them alone in the cold. Brandon tore the envelope open with frantic, freezing fingers. He probably expected cash. He probably expected a letter from a lawyer offering a settlement. What he found was a photograph. It was a selfie I had taken an hour ago. In the photo, I was standing at the international check-in counter at O'Hare Airport. I was holding a passport and a boarding pass. The destination printed on the ticket was Auckland, New Zealand. It was a one-way ticket. Behind the photo was a single piece of paper. It was the receipt from the grocery store where I had bought the turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. The turkey they had eaten while mocking me. The turkey I had paid for. I had written a note on the back of the receipt in black ink. The price of that spit was $5 million. That is the value of the trust fund you would have inherited. That is the value of the company you destroyed. That is the value of the house you tried to steal. You treated me like a beggar, so I am leaving you as one. Do not look for me. I do not exist for you anymore. Good luck. I saw Brandon read the note. I saw his knees give out. He collapsed onto the wet pavement, clutching the receipt to his chest, wailing. It was a sound of total defeat. Vanessa snatched the photo, looked at it, and screamed at the sky. She realized there was no one left to manipulate. The bank was not just closed. The bank had moved to the other side of the world. I picked up my carry-on bag. It was light. I had left everything else behind. The old suits, the furniture, the memories of a life spent trying to buy, the love of people who hated me. I walked out of the suite and took the private elevator down to the garage. My car was waiting to take me to the airport. An hour later, I was sitting in the first-class cabin of a Boeing 787. The seats were leather soft and wide. The air smelled of lavender and expensive citrus. A flight attendant approached me with a silver tray. "Champagne, Mr. Harrington?" she asked with a warm smile. I looked at the crystal flute. The bubbles rose in a perfect golden line. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." I took the glass. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. The city of Chicago drifted past gray and cold. I saw the skyline where I had built my empire. I saw the streets where I had raised my son. I saw the ghost of the man I used to be. The engines roared to life, pressing me back into the seat. We lifted off, climbing through the clouds, breaking through the gray ceiling into the blinding, brilliant sunlight above. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold and crisp. It tasted like victory. I opened the magazine in front of me and turned to the page about New Zealand. Green hills, blue water, quiet, peace. I had bought a small vineyard there. I was going to grow grapes. I was going to build things with my hands again. I was going to live for me. I didn't look down at the city as it disappeared beneath the clouds. I didn't wonder if Brandon had made bail. I didn't wonder where Vanessa would sleep. Those were questions for a different man. I turned the page. I finished my drink. And for the first time in 72 years, I didn't look back. I just closed my eyes and flew into the sun. I learned that you cannot buy respect, no matter how much you pay. By shielding my son from the consequences of his actions for so long, I didn't help him. I crippled him. True love isn't about giving someone the world. It's about teaching them how to survive in it. I also learned that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. If someone treats you like a burden, remove the weight from their shoulders and walk away. Peace is the only luxury that is truly priceless. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more life stories. Let me know in the comments. Did I go too far, or did my son get exactly what he deserved?